Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to install and set up VirtualBox. In addition, I will also show you how to install and run Ubuntu as a virtual machine using VirtualBox. If you don't already know what VirtualBox is a software that allows you to run an entire operating system, which I'll refer to as a guest operating system, on another operating system, which I'll refer to as the host. In this example, you can see that I'm using Windows 10. This is my host operating system, and as I stated before, I'm going to show you how to install Ubuntu. So in that case, Ubuntu is our guest operating system. Now, there's several reasons why you'd want to run a virtual machine on your computer. One of those, and I think this is probably fairly a common reason, is that you want to run a software that's only available on another operating system. So as an example, say if you're a Windows user and you want to use Apple's, Logic or GarageBand software suite, that's only available on Mac. But since you have Windows 10, you can't use that. So what you can do is use VirtualBox to spin up a virtual machine that runs Mac OS, and then you can try out and use Logic and GarageBand and other software that are exclusive to Mac. Another reason is maybe you just want to try out a new operating system without having to buy another PC and install that operating system on physical hardware. This is a much cheaper and more elegant solution just to try out software real quick. And the final reason, and I'm sure this is probably why most of you are here, is you just want to watch porn without having to worry about installing viruses on your host operating system. All right, so to get started with installing VirtualBox, we first have to make sure that our CPU can support virtualization. To do that, just go click on the Windows icon or search for My Computer. And they changed it to this PC on Windows 10. Just right click, hit Properties. So what this is going to do is this is going to give us the model number of our CPU. So I'm running a Intel i7 8700K CPU. So if I search that in Google, the first link is always going to be the Intel page. So this page will show us all the features, the specifications of our CPU. And what we want to do is search for VT, Intel Virtualization Technology. So we need to make sure that it says yes here, which implies that we can run virtualization and run virtual machines on this CPU. If you're using AMD, just repeat the same process, but instead of searching for Intel VTX, I believe the feature is called AMD-V. So you want to make sure that your CPU has AMD-V so that you can run virtual machines on that CPU. So once you've confirmed that you do in fact support the respective technology, what you need to do is you have to go into the BIOS and you need to make sure that virtualization is enabled there, because you always have to enable it in your BIOS. I'm not going to show you how to do that in this video because your BIOS is going to be different based off of whatever motherboard you have, and it's going to be different for every user, so there wouldn't be much value add in me showing you how to do that. So after you've enabled virtualization in your BIOS, the next thing you have to do is install VirtualBox. So just Google VirtualBox, and it's going to be the first link. Go to Downloads, and just select your respective host operating system. I'm running Windows, so I'm just going to select Windows. If you're running either Mac or Linux, just click on those respective links. Once VirtualBox has finished downloading, just click on the exe file, and we're going to get a pop-up with the install wizard. Just keep clicking next. You're eventually going to see this menu, which I'm sure you've all seen before for any other software you've installed. I never like the quick launch bar, so I always uncheck that one. Feel free to just leave everything checked by default. And this is just telling you that you're going to temporarily lose network connectivity. Just go ahead and hit yes on that. All right, once it's finished installing, make sure that this is checked so that it automatically loads up Oracle VirtualBox. You can see here I've already had a previous install of Ubuntu. Just go ahead and ignore that. So let's go ahead and install Ubuntu. To do that, let's go to the Ubuntu page and download the ISO file. Just go ahead and Google Ubuntu, click on that link, and then go to download Ubuntu desktop. This is the latest stable release. You can also run a newer release if you'd like, but I would just say go ahead and download 1804.2. This is just showing you some things you can contribute some money to Ubuntu. We're not going to do that today. So it's a fairly large file. It's about 1.9 gigs, so it's going to take a little while to download. I'll go ahead and just fast forward through this video, and I'll touch base with you guys once it's finished downloading. All right, so Ubuntu has finished downloading. Open up VirtualBox again, and to create a new virtual machine, just hit this blue icon right here that says New. It's going to open up this dialog window. Feel free to name the virtual machine whatever you like. I usually just name it something that's fairly obvious and descriptive, so I'm just going to call it my Ubuntu VM. Under the type, select Linux, and under the version, select Ubuntu 64-bit. If you only see 32-bit as an option, that probably means you didn't enable virtualization in the BIOS. So just reload your computer, log into BIOS, and make sure that virtualization has been enabled. Hit Next. So this is where we assign the amount of RAM that this virtual machine is going to use. So I have 32 gigs of RAM on my host PC. I can assign any amount of RAM that I want. Right now it defaults to a gig. I usually just give it, a gig, 2 gigs, 3 gigs, whatever you want. It doesn't really matter too much. Don't worry about giving your virtual machine too much RAM. The great part about virtualization is that when the virtual machine is running, if he only uses 1 gig, but you've assigned him 10 gigs of RAM, it doesn't mean we're going to always reserve just 10 gigs for the virtual machine. If the virtual machine is only using 1 gig, the other 9 gigs can still be used by either other virtual machines or your host operating system. So giving it too much RAM isn't too big of a deal. If you don't give it enough, then you're going to see that there's going to be issues with your virtual machine. But that's even not that big of a deal. Just go ahead and shut down your VM, and then you can give it more RAM. You can always change the value. This is just a starting point, so I'm just going to give it around 3 gigs. Hard disk. So we want to select create a virtual hard disk now. Here you have the different hard disk file types. I usually just do VDI, but if you want to be able to use this virtual machine on other platforms or other hypervisors like VMware-based hypervisors like ESXi or VMware Workstation, then you may want to select VMDK. But for just VirtualBox use, VDI works just fine. Now you have 2 options when it comes to allocating your disk space for your virtual machine. We have dynamically allocated and fixed size. So in the next tab, we're going to assign a certain amount of hard disk space to the VM. I'm probably going to just give it the default of 10 gigs. The difference between these 2 options is when I give it 10 gigs, if I select fixed size, what will happen is that my host operating system will reserve the 10 gigs and basically assign it to the VM, and we will not be able to use those 10 gigs for any other virtual machines or our host operating system. If you select dynamically allocated, what that does is when we install Ubuntu, we're only going to actually use maybe a gig of space. That means that at that point in time, we'll have 9 gigs of unused space. And when you do dynamically allocated, the virtual machine will only use 1 gig from your host operating system, and those 9 gigs will be free to be used by anybody. And once the Ubuntu VM starts using more and more data, it will then start assigning that extra gigabytes of space and start associating it with that virtual machine. So it basically dynamically allows your virtual disk to grow in size. I always just select that, and that way it allows me to, give my virtual machine a whole bunch of space, and then only if my virtual machine uses that space will I then lose that space from my physical PC. So I'm just going to give it 10 gigs of space. You can give it whatever you want. If you're using this virtual machine to do a lot of work, you're going to be downloading lots of files, then give it more space. If you're just playing around with it, then 10 gigs is more than enough. So after we've hit create, we can see our new VM gets created. First thing you want to do is go into settings. So this is the kind of the power of virtualization. You can see here that basically any component of a physical PC is represented by one of these tabs. So in general, we've got just information regarding the VM. Under system, this is kind of like this is our memory, our RAM. It also has our CPU and other things of that nature. So here we can change how much RAM we give it. I'm going to keep it at 3 gigs. This is the processor. So right now we've only given it 1 CPU, but we can give it 2 if you want. It's just a matter of personal preference. I have a total of 12 CPUs on this PC. But for just a simple Ubuntu VM, 2 CPUs, 1 CPU is more than enough. And don't worry about that. Those settings under display, we want to give it the max amount of video memory. And we want to make sure we enable 3D acceleration and 2D video acceleration. Storage. So here we have the controller for IDE. What you want to do is select the empty box and then click here. Click the disk icon actually, and then you want to choose a virtual optical disk file. And here we go to the Ubuntu file that we downloaded in the previous step and just select that. And what this is doing is that basically Ubuntu doesn't know that he's being installed as a virtual machine. And what we have to do is we have to simulate the different components of an actual PC. So in this case, we're giving him a virtual optical drive. So Ubuntu doesn't know it's a virtualized optical drive. He'll think it's just like any other physical optical drive. So it's just basically inserting this ISO file as a CD into his CD player of the PC. Leave audio fine as it is. Network, I don't want to spend too much time in that. You can just leave it as a default, but we do have a few different options based on how you want the virtual machine to handle networking. If you just want to be able to just kind of route out to the internet and just kind of work like any other PC, just leave it as NAT and it'll work just fine. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover in the settings section. We do have the shared folders option, which is a neat little feature where Ubuntu, once we install it, it's going to be a completely separate PC that's isolated from your host operating system. So they won't be communicating in any special way other than 2 different devices on a network. But what we can do is we can select a folder in our host operating system, like our documents folder, and what it'll do is that basically Ubuntu will have access to our documents folder or any other folder we select. So it'll allow you to move files really quickly between your host operating system and your guest operating system. For now, I'm just going to leave that setting alone. I don't really want to mess with that. So after we've done all that, go ahead and hit start. So this is going to start our virtual machine. Just give it a sec and you'll see a window pop up. So once we get into the install page for Ubuntu, just select install Ubuntu and then select your respective language. We're going to keep it as an English keyboard. You have the ability to also detect what keyboard layout you're using if you don't know. Hit continue after that. Leave everything as normal installation, download updates while installing Ubuntu. Install third, I always like to check this one as well. Hit continue after that. Leave everything to its defaults. You'll see here it says erase disk and install Ubuntu. Do not panic. We are not deleting the disk on our host operating system. What this is saying is we're deleting the disk space. Oh, we're deleting everything on the disk for the 10 gigs that we assigned to the Ubuntu VM. So don't worry, you're not actually deleting any files or anything of that nature. You're just, it's basically like a fresh installation for those 10 gigs. Hit install now and go ahead and hit continue. And then basically select your location. I'm going to be in the New York time zone. Your name. You can change the username. I'm just going to keep it to my name. Change the password. All right, after Ubuntu has finished installing, it's going to ask you to restart. So just go ahead and hit the restart now button. After Ubuntu has reloaded, just go ahead and hit that user icon and then put in the password that you had selected previously. And then hit sign in. So this is just the welcome page to Ubuntu and just letting you know what's new. Not really that important, but basically here is the list of applications and icons that you have available. We have Firefox installed by default. We also have the package manager here in Ubuntu that allows you to install software without having to use the command line if you're not familiar with that. But that's basically it. So now we have Ubuntu. Feel free to play around with it. Try out different things in Ubuntu. If you want to learn the command line, that's a great skill set to have. But outside of that, I think that's about all I'm going to cover in this video. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. If you wanted me to make up a follow-up video, talking about some of the more advanced features of VirtualBox, feel free to let me know.